Whoops. Uh, how's the sound and the video? Everything working okay? Morning, Rel. Um, is the sound okay, Rel? The sound in the video? Everything working all right? Got to have my first cup of coffee. Oh, good. Everything's working. Oh, great. Hi, Dark Star. Hi, neighbor. Aloysius. Good morning. Oh, my mug. Yeah, I've had this for years. I got this mug in Quebec City years ago. It's come to be my favorite cup or mug. Ah, now it's empty. Hey, Dominic. Good to see you. Caesar, good morning. Good to see everyone. Uh-oh. How you doing, Clyde? Let's see. When JLC upped the price of its reverso line by significant percentage overnight, does it mean that it's overpriced or was previously underpriced? Of all of the above. Hi, Brian. Hey, good morning, hater. I guess it's not morning over there, though, is it? I know it's Holland. Well, let's talk about being overpriced. I think the ranchers point to a good one. I mean, when something overpriced or underpriced or priced just right, I have no idea. When I bought this watch, I got this watch during what was called the Asian crisis, and what happened that there were a lot of watches that were sent to Asia, and at the time, the Chinese government was having a big crackdown because people were buying watches and bringing them back and bribing officials with them, basically. And so what happened, they had to ship back a bunch of watches, and so they discounted them, and they discounted mine by 10,000 bucks. And so, I mean, it was hacha hacha, it was great, but was it priced at the right amount or not? Yeah, I know. Those are some things. Clyde, that's exactly the kind of things I think is important to talk about. What I wanted to start talking about, though, is something that those of us involved in LaRique uh, have been dealing with, and not so much for what we're doing specifically, but rather what goes on in the watchmaking business. And I realize that different companies have different things going on. So I put together something called MLP for the cost of materials, the cost of labor, and the profit. Now, when you get a watch, especially one by one of the top watchmakers, a small and when you have a smaller number of smaller edition, we'll say, um, and so the um the prices that we pay, uh even with the parts, because we have to break it down essentially. When we buy a watch, we have to break it down to the cost of the movement, the cost of the case, the cost of the dial, the cost of the hands, and the cost of the case. Those are the big ones, and then we have the strap and the buckle. Those are also separate costs. But the movement, let me just a few things that go on into what goes into the movement. Agonor and not all others, but most others, including ones that everything is in house, have to get their gears from companies that specialize in gear making. And so when they buy a gear, let's say company A is your watchmaker, And so they've got to buy parts for the movements, and we'll say that company G makes gears, and so here's some guy in selling gears, and so they have the materials, which probably isn't going to be a great deal. They have the labor, which includes all the machining and everything else that has to be done to make a gear, and then they have to make a profit. I mean, they're not going to say, "Let's see if we can break even or go out of business." And so you have that's by materials, labor, and profit. Now, some of the things that go in that I know about, right, that that Agenor, and like I said, most others are gonna have to pay for, to get their watches together. You have the gear, the escapement, the balance wheel, the balance spring, bridges and plates. Then you have finishers. Now, what the finishers do, there's no materials involved. They already have the materials that were supplied by the people who provided the bridges and plates, and so you just have L and P, labor and profit, and then you have the mainspring. Now, there's probably some other things I left out. I'm sure there were. You have the screws and all of these other little details too. But each one of them, the company that makes them has to make a profit to stay in business, to pay the people or pay themselves to make all of these parts. So we're not just even when we break it down into what 5 different parts, for in terms of budgeting and so forth. Now, this doesn't include other kinds of things like shipping. Everything has to be shipped. In our case, they had to go all over the world, and so you have these things, and so coming to saying, "Oh, well, what's a fair price?" It becomes, it's not one of those things. Well, they did this and they did that, and things change. Let me give you an example. Uh, Before the pandemic, things were sort of going along on a fairly stable basis in Switzerland in the watchmaking. During the pandemic, things really got boy, that threw a big wrench in everything. So when they came out of it, a lot of people didn't go back to work. I mean, they figured, man, I've had it watchmaking. I'd rather become a communicator. I'd rather have my own blog. I gotta stay home and, you know, and wear comfy clothes. So so you have that. So they were scrambling. They had a very hard time getting the people who made the parts, and putting the watch together. Another one we have, of course, is assembly. You gotta pay somebody to assemble, just the movement, then assemble the watch on top of that. Now, true, there's certain things that I'll call, um, well, there's 2 really. One is companies, I imagine, like Rolex, that they say they make everything and they even have their own foundry and so forth for melting the metal and so on and so forth. Okay, assuming all of that is accurate, um, then you have whatever involvement was set up for that. Um, and so they're and with the number of watches that they make, they have a great, uh, I guess, with economy of scale. Now, on the other hand, Larique, we have an economy of scale of like, I think the first time was 70, and this time it's 100, actually 102, because we wanted a watch for the GPHG and for the only watch. So anyway, so we have these things are going on. Now, that is like the basic cost. On the other hand, and especially this is one of the things where you have a larger number that you gotta move, that means you're going to have to do some other things. Usually, it means marketing and advertising and all of that. That is stacked on top of that dealer discount. Um if you buy a watch, let's say for $10,000, you go into a shop and buy it, chances are, the person in the shop selling it is selling it for half of what, he paid for it. So Mr. or Ms. Watchmaker or watch seller, and they have these things, and there's companies like Patek Philippe and Rolex, especially those two, have very strict rules. I mean, they don't. You're not supposed to discount. You got to do this. You got to do that, and so forth. And as soon as they have a watch, boom, it's gone. This is it's probably more so true with Rolex than anything else. Then you have what's called the worst term, the most inaccurate term I think ever is the premium. All right. So let's say you go and you want to get a nice Rolex, we'll say a Submariner for about $9,500. That's the MSRP. And so you go in there and they want, let's say 15,000 for it. And you say, wait a minute, you whip out your your phone and bring up the site, says, see, it says 9,500 or whatever it is, and you want this much. Well, they say there's a premium on these. Not a premium, it's price gouging. I mean, it's sort of like call it what it is. And I'm not picking on Rolex. This could be true for a lot of other watches as well. As soon as you get popular, by the same token, um, people like me try to find ones that are the opposite. They have them. They have overstock. They gotta get rid of them, and so at a certain. But usually this is just at a certain period of time, and so coming out and saying, "Behold, this is overpriced." Well, you got to look at it in a much larger context rather than just like, because like one of the things that happened, everything went up after the pandemic. And I think a good deal of that was people who had been working from home or other kinds of things. They just thought, well, I'm going to try something different. And this really messed things up. Okay, so let's see what you have. Brit Peace did a video recently during the pandemic. Swiss watch companies had their best year for profits while selling the fewest pieces ever. This does not bode well for collectors. That's true. That's yeah. Well, on the other hand, uh, this is the time because I got one of the best deals ever just a few months ago when I bought that Fabergé. Because it had been what originally 17,000, and I got it at a huge discount for a lot of reasons. But it wasn't because it wasn't a very high quality. It had engine turned guilloche. It had a white gold case. It had a Frederick Piguet movement. If you look at those kinds of things, I think you can find some great deals. On the other hand, if you want to say, look what I got. I got an Acme watch. And you don't. You're gonna pay more for that. You pay I saw these things, they some company, maybe it was I forget who it was, or maybe a lot of them had these squads, and they go out and they hire these celebrities, which is really expensive, and so they come around and they got their watch on, they got their Acme watch, and they're saying, "Look at my watch, we're the this is the best watch." Anybody dumb enough to listen to celebrities talking about their watch. If you talk, I mean, there's certain celebrities like the drummer for Kiss. He knows he's a real watch collector, but most of them, they're doing it for the money, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm sure that you know, I guess some people wouldn't do it. I know that Rancher's been offered a lot of money to endorse certain watches, but he wouldn't do it. So you understand how that goes. Okay, let's see what's going on here. Hey, Dominic, what do you got? All companies have overhead. You bet they do. You bet they do. See, this is the thing is the idea is that, well, I'm going to make a watch. And like, for example, if Larique were a company, we'd go out of business because we don't have we really don't have a profit. I mean, we're not, our profit is the watch itself. But, I mean, as a ongoing business, you need something else. Hey, Koji, what you got here? The new IWC engineer and brigade type X prices show how crazy things have gotten. The thing about IWC, possibly brigade too, some of the brigades and some of the Omegas, they've got these ETA movements in them or Salida movements. Now, there's nothing wrong with those movements, but you're not paying for a top of the line movement. You're paying for one that is far cheaper. The one of the thing about Larique watches is that we're paying out the nose for a really good movement. I mean, that's where our major investment is in the horology. So it's something that that's where their profit margin is, and they know it. It's in the movement. If you use a cheaper movement, so this is also what Richemont realized. They started Val Fleurier so they could make movements, the same movement with a different paint job for the I don't know how many 10 or so watch companies. So Vacheron Constantin, Baume et Mercier, God knows what else. Some of the other ones, Cartier, Piaget, they all have the same movement coming out of Val Fleurier. So that means there's one cost, there's one machining, there's one everything, and then they spread it around. They can save a lot of money that way. Interesting kind of stuff going on. But on the other hand, well, one thing I will say for that, Vacheron Constantin's 56 or entry level is, I think, half of what you normally pay for a Vacheron Constantin. I think it's like 11,000. They have a real entry level, but that's because they're saving money on where else on the movement. That's it's sort of a funny. It's a funny kind of thing. On the other hand, IWC, Breitling, and some of these other companies, you look at the watch and it's on a Breitling is like a B 500 or some other number like that, and you say, oh, it must be a Breitling movement. Well, it's not a Breitling movement. It turns out to be a Salida. Same thing with IWC, and a lot of other companies do that. So, excuse me. All right. So where are you finding overpricedness? I don't know. I tell you the just the right price uh, is one where you keep the company going and you do this and you do this. Um, on Park Avenue in New York City is Cellini Jewelers, one of my very favorite jewelers or watch stores too, and they have all of these great watches: Gronfeld, Parmigiani, Beauvais. Um, who else? Wooten Lannon, all of these. I think they have uh, Streller and just all of these really great watches. But here they are. You look at them and they're on the shelf there. That's part of their stock. So they had to pay a lot of money, not to mention what they have to pay for a shop on Park Avenue in New York City is not cheap. So, you if you factor all of those things in, you say, well, those guys are overpriced. Not to stay in business or not. You know, okay, hey, Caesar, it's very subjective. Well, to some extent it is, I guess. But it's not subjective in the sense that you've got certain expenses. I mean, as a watch seller and watchmaker and so forth, it's subjective. You also have something if you can get people who really want something. Look what happened to FP Journe. God knows what happened to them, and suddenly they're the most valuable watch around. I've never seen anything go up like that. Okay, even Larique can be very overpriced for someone that just wants to tell the time. Well, okay, Larique is expensive. Not because it's overpriced, I don't think. I don't think we could make it even any lower unless we started using cheaper materials, and that's what a lot of companies do. It's relatively speaking to the price of things for the quality. That's what we end up having to do. Now, I'm not trying to defend Larique. I mean, we have it's we actually, believe it or not, we actually do a heck of a lot of work to get this thing done right. But there are other expenses. We simply avoid all of these expenses. We all of them as much as possible. I think the middle class and upper middle class is being squeezed out of the watch market. Yeah, there's something on the other end. I've got my wife some really nice watches. She used to wear them all the time. Then I got her an Apple Watch. I got her one of the Hermes Apple Watches, and they got a little horsey picture of the Hermes horse. She wears that all the time. Keep perfect time, very stylish, and everywhere you go, you see somebody with one of those big square Apple Watches, and then every now and then the phone rings and she's talking to her watch, you know, and and what would be considered a very high price for a smartwatch is a bargain for us. Wow, you only had to pay very little for that. Next, the cost there is time, a little over a year to produce the actual watch. No kidding. And it's yes. You know what's happened too, Hater, is that we have suddenly coming out of the pandemic, there are a lot of other companies say, okay, let's crank up again. And so all of the watchmaking companies they're suddenly getting more business and they've got to take care of. And then you also have things like if you deal with a company, a really good one, you're going to have things happen. I think I think in general they're good things. Like um H. Moser bought an interest. Either Moser or Precision Engineering, but they're part of the same unit. They're going to be they're going to be have an influence in terms of what's available. Like if we say, well, hey, we want to get, you know, 5 dozen watches with the agrograph movement. I don't know if they'd be able to supply us with it at this particular point in time because those things happen. If you think there is no opportunism in price increases lately, you're delusional. Well, I think we're all delusional, Rancher. You know that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be watch collectors. We'd be doing something responsible. If anything captures the interest of the community of the general public, it quickly becomes unobtainable at MSRP. Yeah, that's true. You get even pet rocks. I think there was a run on pet rocks at one time. Of course, they're easy to forge. Hey, Sam's dad's mustache walks. A lot of times, the in-house movement is less reliable than the mass market movement. You know, you got a point there. There's some movements that they're sort of cobbled together simply so they can say they have an in-house movement. I think that's a good point. Yeah, I think Rancher's point's a good one. A lot of times they imply that our watches, our movement is really in-house. A few years ago, Braemont got in a whole lot of trouble. They got in a heap of trouble for claiming that about their watch being having an in-house movement. And Roger Smith came down on them like a load of bricks, and they sort of had to. Well, maybe not. It was sort of like it was in-house ish. Sounded like George Santos. Um, hey, Kotev, this is your first live. Oh, good. Welcome, Dean. Good to have you here. Chris Ward, representative, upon introduction of the 12, has told that Swiss watch brands are average production spendings are 3.5 of the price. The 12 at 35%. I can tell you that's not true with ours. I don't know where Chris, where he got the Chris Ward rep got that information, but I could tell you it's not true. At least with ours, it's not. 'Cause I know what expenses go into it. Not cheap by any stretch of the imagination, but look at that. My okay, your MetaDev friend averages good percent to be 15 to 18. Okay. 15 is for most goods. not specifically watches. See, this is one of the funny things. If the watches that we're dealing with right now, at least Larique, I'm talking about, they have to be made from scratch. They even had to hire a guy to do the casing for us because normally they just make movements, Agenor. So you have these designs. Now you hear these companies say, "Well, it cost us $10 million to develop a new movement." And it does, but what they're talking about all of the tooling, all of the manufacturing things that have to go with it on these more mass market, uh, m movements. You take, for example, I saw a thing that, Tag Heuer had a big investment, and they had all of these smart robots working on them. The hobby has warped my perception of the value. All him and haw over $1,000 purchase, and but slap down much more instantly without hesitation for what? Rancher? God, the same thing happened to me. I was looking at a watch. Oh yeah, I was talking the other day on the video that I had about sports watches. Had this watch. That thing's only $500. My wife and I buy something for $500. It takes us 6 months to make up our mind about it. But you like you say, you see a watch, "Oh, boy, that's a great deal, only $10,000. Let me at it." You know, that's insane. Hey, Dark Star, what's your thoughts on Oris in-house movement? Sounds like it's, outsourced, but, I have a lot. Oris did something that I really liked not too long ago with their movement. So I got a lot of respect for Oris. I think Oris is see, one of the things is that they have is that they gotta stay in business, and they gotta figure out sort of what path they can take through all of these things. Now, uh, I think certain ones start opening up, paths, like, I used to love Patek Philippe's, and now I won't have one, after 2009 because I can't stand the idea of putting in silicone hairsprings, even with all of the advantages that they have. But I mean, I figured, well, I might as well go get a smartwatch if I want to progress and watches and so forth. But see, that's me. Yeah, yeah, he's the guy that invented the Cartier Santos. Hey, Ned. Oh, yeah, I know. That was there's I was forging pet rocks left and right, Ned, when they were popular. Uh Wants and needs, the difference is much easier, to sell to the wants, you're right. Absolutely true. I mean, before I got into really seriously into watch collection, I bought what was it? Raymond Weil, and I thought I was getting a really expensive watch. I think I paid 2 or $300 for it. Oh, boy, that's a lot for a watch. Had an automatic movement. The movement was an ETA movement. I didn't know it at the time, but I thought, "Oh, boy." It's I think the notion of some of the watches I bought, I have to somebody says, "Oh, what did you pay for that watch?" You say, "Well, I got a really good deal on it. I this one, I only had to pay, 25,000 for it, which as opposed to 35." And that's sort of like, "Oh my god." I mean, I don't believe you, first of all. I I had to show my accountant. He wanted to know why in the world a watch that I paid not too much for ended up over, $200,000. In fact, it was, over 400 at one time. But these kinds of things are sort of different realities, and I think Rancher hit the nail on the head when he said, "It's warped our view of things." I don't know how I could, come up with this stuff. The other thing too, I think in terms of overpricing, um, I don't know what right pricing is. I think some of the criteria for overpriced watches. I think the number one is, and I think this is what Rancher mentioned. was that you have a something in your watch that you're misrepresenting. For example, this is why I got so mad at IWC and Breitling and some of these other guys. They had an inexpensive ETA or Salida movement, but that's not what they called it. They called it they called it something else. So whatever price they had, in my opinion, was overpriced because they were misrepresenting the watch. That's that's my thing on it. But I think it's important to understand before we say something is overpriced or fairly priced or a great deal even, what goes into it and what are all what is the context, that it's done in. Anyway, rancher tells me it's time to I'm gonna get hit with a rolling pin if I don't shut up. Anyway, um, yeah, Dark Star, that might be the thing. Trouble is that when I overpay for a watch, I have wonderful dreams about my my overpaid watch. I got it. We're nuts. Okay, guys, I'll be back at 4, and I'll figure out something else we could talk about without any definitive answer to it. Anyway, in the meantime, be safe and take care.